Music Business, What Is This? Is a podcast that focuses on the ever-changing music industry and presents issues and concerns that the average and above average musician has or will encounter.
Hey everybody, this is Music Business.
What is this?
I'm Jeremiah Hunt.
And I'm Richard Johnson.
And today we're going to be talking a little bit about how we got started in this whole music business. I want to talk a little bit about Richard's story. So I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
How did you get started in the whole music thing? Like where did your love for music come from? How did it start for you?
Okay, I grew up in a musical household. My dad plays piano and organ. And my mom sings, not professionally, but she definitely could have been a professional opera singer. She would walk around the house imitating everything she heard. Sounds, vocalists, the microwave beeping, anything you could think of. People talking. She's like a comedian sometimes. She just mimics people. You know, you've seen my mom. I'm not lying. He's been to my house several times. And that's what she does naturally. It's like, it's funny to see, but she's a great imitator. So yeah, I grew up in a musical household. I would go to bed hearing my dad play the piano and organ because he played in church. So he would be practicing hymns, gospel songs, and that's what we would go to sleep to. And my friends thought it was crazy because they would come over for sleepovers and they would say, "How are you going to sleep to this?" And I would be like, "Well, how are you not going to? You just go to sleep." Right. We're used to it. I mean, my brother and sister, he'd be playing, practicing. You just go to sleep. Yeah. You know, but I realized that was not normal. So I started at home, just listening to my dad, and he started giving me lessons. And to be honest, I didn't enjoy it. Not at all. I didn't one bit. I didn't like it. He would take me to the piano, and eventually he said, okay. It was to the point I didn't like it. He still has the same piano. I took a hammer, and I chipped the ivory keys with it. I broke 3 of the keys. Oh, wow. Yep. And he's never fixed it. So he can show me and remind me. Right. If you go in, yes. You can go into this day and you see it. And if you play it too hard, you cut yourself. So I was like, this isn't cool. But I didn't realize I was actually learning a whole lot just being around him in that environment. And not just musically, but I think I actually learned more about his work ethic. Because my dad had a day job. He worked for Sears. But then he would come home and he would shed. He'd go to work, he'd practice, we'd eat dinner, and then he would practice and shed for like 3-4 hours. You know, I just thought that was normal. And as I got older, I was like, why is this dude still doing this? Like, he knows the tunes. He doesn't need to practice these hymns. You look in a hymn book, there's like 300 or 400 tunes. Right. He knows all of them. Wow. Right. And I'm not saying that. I mean, he knew all of them. He's still alive. And it just comes from time playing and his friends growing up. He's from Baltimore. All his friends played piano and organ. So for him, it was normal. You know, so people were like, well, how did he get into it? My grandmother sang. My great uncle is Herbie Blake. A lot of people don't know that. My uncle Dan used to play piano. So it was just normal. Everybody played. Yeah. So I was just like, well, I guess I play. And right. You know, it's just normal. Yeah. So I tell my students, it's like having a computer in your house. Most people have a computer, and you want to send an email, you just go over and type it and don't think about it. That's what the piano was for us, my brother, and you just go and do what you got to do and keep going. Right. How you learn information is kind of osmosis, but you learn from watching and seeing other people, and you just do it. So that's how I got into it. But I wasn't serious at all about it. And then I started playing trumpet, just like you. Okay. Yeah, my dad played cornet and trumpet. So
you still got your trumpet?
I don't, but I know my parents do.
Okay.
They keep everything.
Yeah.
Everything. So I started trumpet. I played trumpet 4th grade up to like 9th or 10th. So I played a while. I remember my band teacher, Mr. Bill Pedagogy, and my other band teacher, middle school, Mr. Dunn. great directors, great family men, great musicians. I didn't know that at the point they were really good. They were great jazz musicians. At that time, I was just playing gospel and whatever was cool, you know, like there was a song by LL Cool J. Do, 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 do. When I'm alone in my room, you know, I was just playing jams like that on the keyboard because my dad had bought a DX7. And that was the sound in all the songs in the 80s.
Okay.
And my dad had bought one for church. And he took me to the store with him to get the amp. So I remember going into the store, which now I look at it, it's probably like half the size of my basement. But then when I was a kid, it was humongous.
Right.
All the keyboards, and I remember him bringing it home. And I remember when he bought his organ. I mean, I visually remember all these things and him just toying with it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what really got me into just music in general. So yeah, that was kind of like my foundation. And
so what brought you to Chicago?
Well, let's see. When I finished high school, we moved to Boston. I started driving down to Berklee College of Music. It was about 45 minutes south when I was in 11th grade. That's when I got serious about the piano. It's a funny story, actually. My brother and I were going to our new schools. We're in the band room. I see a piano, and I'm playing a gospel tune on the piano. And the band teacher comes in, and he's like, "Who are you?" And I'm like, "Oh, we're new students. We're getting ready to start this week, and I wanted to check out the music room." And he said, "So you play jazz, huh?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, not really. I mean, I play in the church gospel music." And he said, "Well, sounds like jazz to me. You want to be in the jazz band? You got it."
Yeah.
And I said, "I don't know." I said, "Does it get me out of any classes?" He said, "We can work that out." And I was like, "Then I play jazz." Right. And it just so happened that the chorus teacher was a jazz pianist. Which was, I didn't know at the time. So I was like, man, how am I going to learn this music? And the chorus teacher heard me and he said, "Have you ever heard of Oscar Peterson?" And I said, "No, who's that?" He said, "Let me give you something." So he gave me this cassette tape. I took it home and I'd never heard anything like that in my life. I said, "Is this two people playing?" He said, "No, that's one dude. You can do it though." I said, "Come on." So he started giving me little solos, little blues. And I learned it. I said, "Oh, this stuff is for kids." So then he gave me an Oscar Peterson solo, and I remember struggling with it. But eventually I got it, and he would give me lessons. And then after the first year, I entered all county, all states. I won that. And then nationals. And then I entered a composition contest because they started to show me how to write, you know, for small group and big bands and orchestras. So I wrote a big band piece for Harvard University big band, and I won the piece. And it's funny, now that I'm older, I look back at these things. The guest artist for that competition was a pianist named Andrew Hill. I had no clue who he was. So I'm winning this award, and there's this African-American guy shaking my hand, smiling, super happy. And I was cordial. Didn't know anything about the guy. Took the picture, took the money. It's still hanging up in my folks' the ward's house. Didn't think about it till maybe like 20 years later, when one of my friends, a tenor player, Greg Tardy, played with him for a while, and I'm looking at this recording because Greg Tardy's on it. And I'm like, man, I know this guy, but I don't know why. So I started looking, and after several months, I realized, oh, snap, that's the dude I met when I was 17 and I won this award. Right, so I win this award at Harvard, and it's also crazy, winning that award allowed me to go to some of their big band rehearsals. And while I was at that rehearsal, you got to remember I'm a high school kid, there was these other two pianists that were incredible. I just couldn't believe it. One, his name was Ben Walter.
Okay, yeah.
Right, so for years, I didn't remember his name, but I remembered who he was. The other piano player was a guy named Aaron Goldberg, and he was from Boston. And I remember him because we were like a year apart in age. So we became good friends. And it's a crazy story, crazy life, because, you know, he'd be on tour, I'd be on tour later on. We'd see each other. We'd always play basketball in different cities, me, him, my old roommate. And one day he said, "Oh, you're in Chicago now." He said, "That's where Ben is." And I was like, "Who's Ben?" And he's like, "Well, do you remember that piano player when you came to the Harvard thing?" I said, "No, I've been thinking about that guy for like 25 years. And he said, "Yeah, he lives in Chicago, and this is his name." I said, "Are you serious?" So I went on Instagram and I wrote him a message. I said, "Hey, man, I know you don't remember me, but my name's Richard Johnson." Immediately, bling, I remember you. And he showed up at the gig I was on.
Wow.
I was like, wow, you know, so we've been good friends. And, you know, if I ever have to sub out a gig or anything, I recommend it to him. But yeah, that's how I got into the music. I ended up going to Berklee College of Music. Went there, finished school in 2 years. Got that degree. I went through the summers and I tested out of a bunch of courses. And then I went to Boston Conservatory, got my master's. Finished there in 3 semesters because I went through another summer. Took more courses every semester. And then I got into the Thelonious Monk Institute, now the Herbie Hancock Institute. Went there and studied with the only program director, Mr. Ron Carter, for 2 years.
Yeah.
That was incredible.
Wow.
So we had him every weekend for 2 years. Crazy. And I'll never forget him. He's a great mentor of mine, great friend. And during the year, we had amazing artists as well. Herbie Hancock, Jimmy Heath, Charlie Persip, Phil Woods, Jackie McLean. I mean, you name all of them. I got to play with them, study with them, video, everything. It was incredible. Then after that, all my friends, all of us decided enough school, and we all moved to New York the same day. Literally, we said, we'll get a couple trucks, it's cheaper. Yep.
Let's go.
All of us left at the same. It was like,
Yeah.
we all jetted. And I remember it was 1999, August 30th. Yeah, moved to New York, got there, started doing gigs. I was actually doing gigs in New York because we would drive down from Boston. It was only like 3.5 hours, 4 hours. Got into the scene there, started working with Wynton Marsalis, Irv Mayfield, Russell Malone. Great gigs, touring. Incredible. I remember my first gig with Wynton was crazy because I'd been seeing him for years. This is kind of a crazy story. My roommate had been playing with Wynton for years. His name is Ruben Rogers, if you want to look him up. Great bass player. So I've been seeing Wynton for years. Go to the gigs, sound checks, and would hang out, but he didn't really know I played. Then I moved to New York, and then my first recording had Carlos Enriquez on it and Rodney Green on drums. So we were friends, and Carlos recommended me for this gig with Wynton. Wynton would do these little gigs around New York with Quartet, and I think what happened, what I believe happened, someone could verify this, it was during the time of the Thelonious Monk piano competition. And I couldn't enter the competition because I had been in the band. And they had passed a rule the year before that if you were in a band, you couldn't be in a competition because it's a conflict of interest, because they had somebody win both. So every great piano player was in the competition. So I think by default, I ended up on this gig with Wynton. Carlos recommended me, and I was the last piano player on earth. Right? So I end up on this gig with Wynton. He loved playing chess. He loves playing chess. So it was for, I think at that time, the chess champion in the world was an African-American guy. And they asked Wynton to play it. He said, sure. So we went, played the gig. We were only supposed to play 3 tunes, and we ended up playing like 7 tunes. And normally, he's in and out because he's a super busy dude. But while we would play, he'd come over and say, okay, do this with your left hand, do this with your right hand, do this, play this style. And fortunately, all those years I've been seeing him, I was quietly home practicing all the music and all that stuff because my roommate had it.
Yeah.
So when he's telling me to do all these things, I was like, cool, I got it.
Right.
Yeah, I was ready, boy.
Right to it.
I was, yep. And then finally, the last two, Herlin Riley showed up. And went and saw him and signaled him to get on the drums.
Yeah.
So Herlin gets on the drums and he calls, I remember April. And I knew that because it was on one of Wynton's recordings. So we did it just like that. No problem. After the gig, we finished. Wynton came over to me. He said, hey, little buddy, I've been seeing you around for years. I didn't know you played, but we're going to do a bunch of gigs. And I just kind of laughed. I was like, yeah, right, whatever. And then 2 days later, I got a call from his manager, right? It's crazy. His manager says, hey, we've got these gigs with Garth Fagan on Broadway. Can you do blah, blah, blah?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, snap. And he told me the numbers on it. I was like, whoa. So I said, let me look at my book.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I look at my book, and I actually had a gig with Vanessa Rubin. You know who that is?
No.
She's a great singer. She was really working at the time. She's in Ohio.
Okay.
We had a gig on the QE2, which was the big jazz cruise ship that everybody gets on. And my gig was with her. And they had already bought the tickets and the visa. So I'm on the phone with this guy, this manager, and he's like, of course you're going to do it. And I was like, I can't do it. And his road manager was like, what? Do you know who this is? I was like, yeah, I know who it is. You think I don't want to do it? I was like, but I've got these gigs.
Right.
I said, and to be honest, I was scared to cancel on Vanessa Rubin. I heard she had a bunch of brothers, and I was like, no, I don't know what might happen to me. Right. So I said, well, let me call you back. So I thought about it for a day, and I called him back. I said, hey, I can't do the gig. And he was like, this is the biggest mistake of your life. And I said, it may be, but I'm not going to cancel on her. They bought the ticket. That's I wasn't raised that way. That's not cool.
Right.
So he said, okay, click. So I was just sitting there like, man, what did I do? And then a couple hours later, he called back. He said, cool. Skane wants to know, can you go to Marciac, France? Can you do blah, 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 blah? I was like, yeah. And I could do it all. So that was the beginning of that relationship. So I did that for years. Then I moved to Atlanta, and then I became the director of music for the Atlanta Hawks. And I was working with the NBA. Yeah, and I put together a band, and the band's name was Afar.
Okay.
And the idea was to take a band of jazz musicians and have them play hip hop, and I find them gigs. And that was my concept. And I got to Atlanta, and my brother emailed me. He said, hey, you may want to check out this opportunity. They're looking for a live band. So I said, okay. So I sent them some music. They called me back. I went to the stadium. They said, come in, set up like you're going to play. It's between you and another group. We played. We went hard, and we walked out with the gig. So for the next 2 years, we did every home game for the NBA live in play.
Wow.
So it was incredible because they took out all the canned music, and we had to learn like the top 100 tunes, cover tunes. We never played all the tunes. We might get through 20 seconds before we'd have to stop, or the other team would get the ball because we couldn't play on defense. So I did that. And that was crazy because I got to meet Shaq, Kobe. I had all access pass.
Wow.
So we would eat with the players.
What?
Yeah, all the coaches, all the players at that time, all the stars in Atlanta, Ludacris, Usher would come to the games, and I would see them. Boo-doop, boo-doop.
Yeah.
And we go right into their tunes. They'd be like, yeah, Little John. And they would come on the screen. And imagine the feeling of having 20,000 people rocking out to you. That's a crazy feeling.
Yeah.
And the power of that, because we'd have to know all the team players' favorite songs, because if the game was tied, like 100 to 100, and they only had 3 seconds, I had to know what tunes would get them going so that we could win. So that was a crazy experience. So I did that. Then I moved back to New York a little bit. Then I moved to Baltimore and was there for about a year, too. And I was doing different contracts with the government with my band, flying around to different countries playing. I learned a lot from Herbie Hancock about how to do government tours. So I ended up doing a bunch of government tours. They would send me to crazy countries. I wanted to go to South America. They'd be like, no, we're sending you to Kuwait. We're going to Pakistan. You're going to Bangladesh. Everywhere I didn't want to go, that's where they would send me. So I did that. Then I went to Minneapolis. And during this time, I was still touring, flying out, doing a bunch of different gigs. And then after Minneapolis, I ended up moving to Doha, Qatar to run a jazz club. So I was there on and off for 4 years, except for the summers. And while I was there, I was managing, touring, everything that had to do with operations, getting musicians, dealing with contracting, everything this podcast talks about in the business, checking contracts, flights, name spellings, problem issues with musicians. I mean, everything you could think of. That was my job. My title was Jazz Ambassador. So I did that on and off once again for 4 years. And then while I was there, I said I should buy a house because at that time I hadn't lived anywhere for really 10 years. I didn't have a stable place. My stuff was in storage when I left Atlanta because I was just always on the road touring all the time. And when I was off, I'd go to my parents, and they were north of Chicago, or I would go to my cousins in Baltimore. I would find family members and stay at their house for like a week. It was never more than a week, so it wasn't an issue.
Right.
And I figured this way, whoever I'm playing with, they would pay for me to fly there, and I wouldn't have to pay for it, and I wouldn't have to pay to stay, and I could save all that money, and eventually one day I'd buy a house. So one day it came time to buy a house. My mom kept saying, you need to buy a house, you need to buy a house, you need to buy a house. So finally I said, okay, let me just buy a house. So I found a place. It's near my folks. Bought the house. It was about 40 miles outside of Chicago. And then when my contract ended in the Middle East, I had the house in Chicago. It was fully furnished. It sat for a whole year. And I just moved in and said, okay, time to pick back up Afar music. And then start again, keep going. So that's how I ended up in Chicago.
Wow. Very interesting story. I'm impressed. I got a lot from that. One thing that I took away from that is like work ethics. Like that is something that you have to be able to create opportunities that you have, and loyalty. That's what I like about that Wynton call, because like, man, you turned down the gig with Wynton Marsalis to take this, this in, but then he called you back.
Yeah, when I talked when we got to hang and I told him what happened, he said, yeah, I realized, he said to me, yeah, you're going to have gigs with other people, bigger people, and I wouldn't want you to do that to me for somebody else. And that's when I realized, oh, thank goodness for my parents.
Yeah.
Because I didn't lose the gig.
Yeah. Well, you was raised right. We can say that. Well, I think that's all the time that we have.
Yep, that's it for today.
So, well, you heard it from us. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Music Business.
What is this?
Once again, I'm Jeremiah Hunt.
And I'm Richard Johnson.
We'll see y'all next time.
See you later. Don't be a hater.
This program is partially supported by a grant from the Illinois Arts Council Agency.